Hey everyone, looking for even more Superman talk? If you enjoy digging for Kryptonite, and I hope you do, be sure to check out my new series, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. It's a rewatch podcast covering the classic George Reeves television show from the 50s. You know from this podcast that I fell in love with Adventures of Superman and George's tough but charming take on the Man of Steel. Now, I get to explore that show episode by episode on my new rewatch podcast. Many of your favorite guests from this show are also popping up on the new series, and I hope you'll join us too. New episodes of another exciting episode drop every other Monday, and of course, Digging for Kryptonite continues weekly every Tuesday. Find another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman on your podcast platform of choice, and be sure to subscribe right away. Adventures await. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman is returning guest, All Yeah Comics' very own, sweet Bernie Gerstmayr. Welcome back.
Happy anniversary, Anthony.
Happy anniversary. Happy 30 years since the death of Superman.
Yeah, you seem to really like to talk about this. This is really awesome. I think it's worth having an anniversary party about this discussion. It's great.
It comes up from time to time.
Every now and then I feel like you like to bring it up. Yeah, it's good.
We always, this is sort of a home base in a lot of ways. We always come back here in some way, shape, or form for all the reasons that I have talked about, and that, yes, I'm sure I will continue to talk about. But yeah, it has been 30 years. Obviously, you were on the show just about this time last year when we did our Crisis Till Death event, and we did a couple of episodes on this period, including an episode on the death and funeral. And I said it then, and I'll say it now, that's one of my absolute favorite recordings. I love them all in their own way, but because of how important that story is to me, that holds a very special place for me. So thank you again for joining me for that and coming back now.
Oh gosh, it was so fun. And it's each of us hold this story near and dear. We were both different ages when we both read it, but they equally have weight for both of us as far as our fan journey, our comic book journey, which is really, really cool.
Absolutely. Now, so much to unpack and get through here. Not that we have a lengthy reading list per se, and I'll talk in a second about what we did read in advance of this, but we do have some ground to cover. And I'll pull back the curtain for a second. This is as close to a live episode as I think the audience will get. So I think people have the sense I typically record at least a little bit in advance, sometimes a lot in advance. But in this instance, we are recording it on Monday, November 14th, just past 8 o'clock Eastern, and at midnight Eastern, this episode will be up. So this is as fresh as it's going to get.
True.
Which is exciting in its own way, and a little bit of a different flavor or energy than we typically have. On the kind of on a related, but unfortunately very sad note, we do have the opportunity to address a couple of recent passings within the comics and related industry. So artist Carlos Pacheco recently passed away, and then even more recently than that, Batman voice artist Kevin Conroy. And, so much has been said about both of them. I echo all of it. I mean, there have been so many wonderful tributes and people talking about their talent and what they were like as people. And I don't know that I necessarily have much more to add that hasn't already been said, other than I was very surprised and saddened to hear about both of them. Very sorry that they're no longer with us. Very sorry for their families and friends and collaborators. And as I said when we talked about another passing, Tim Sale, earlier this year, the one, or from the fan perspective at least, I suppose, the one silver lining in this is that their work lives on. And for them in particular, it's work that has stood, and I think it's fair to say will continue to stand the test of time. And you'll continue to have fans like us going back to it and rediscovering it, but you'll always have new people coming to it. And so the work lives on and they live on, and that's a beautiful thing, but still very sad. I know both of these losses, and especially Kevin Conroy, I know really hit people. I know with Carlos Pacheco, the news had broken that he was ill, which I think that in and of itself was surprising, but there was at least some notice with Kevin Conroy. It really, I was, really, certainly really taken by surprise. So very sorry about both of them. Is there anything that you wanted to say about either or both?
Yeah, I just the Kevin Conroy one hit really hard because that Batman animated series to me was like the relaunch of the animated DC universe. Like that started that gave us the Superman animated series, that gave us Justice League Unlimited and all that. And somebody, I can't remember who said it. I'm sure multiple people said it, but when I read a Batman book, Kevin Conroy's voice is who I hear. And I think that rings true for so many people that's why this hurts so hard. You go into any comic book shop. I just was in one, when my wife and I went away this weekend, we hit a shop and the owner and I were talking, we're like, man, Kevin Conroy. And we both just got really quiet. And yeah, that one hurt. Like that, I think the most Christopher Reeve passing, I felt really hard. This one for a very similar reason. Just again, our fan journeys have really awesome personalities and artists along the way. So as we get older and we start to lose people, it gets hard. But they're like, when my own daughters who are in their teens and early college, they know who Kevin Conroy is. So that gets me excited. That, even 30 years younger than me, generations still know who he is. So.
Yeah, I love to hear that. And with respect to Kevin Conroy, I had posted this on social media and I'll reiterate it here. The vocal performance speaks for itself. And like you said, I think so many of us hear that voice in our heads, and that's such a testament to him. One thing that's been really interesting and meaningful to me over these past couple of years really is I feel like he started telling more of his personal story. And the two big instances of that I'm aware of, at least, he did an episode of Michael Rosenbaum's Inside of You podcast, where he talked a lot about he had a very, very difficult upbringing and not great circumstances, to put it mildly. And to see him transcend that is really something remarkable. So, if people never listened or watched, I really do encourage. I think you learn a lot about who he is. And then even more recently, he had a comic book story in the DC Pride special for 2022, where he talks or writes about the experience of being a closeted actor in Hollywood and what the role of Batman allowed him to do and how he was able to identify with this person who was leading a double life. So, and I know, normally I have to say, I don't know if this will still be the case because we're recording it early, but I can say, as I know right now, DC has made that special available for free through the app. So if anyone hasn't read it, it's very powerful. I really would encourage people to read it.
Yeah. And Belle, my daughter, who is going to school right now for film, TV, and theater, she would love to be doing voiceover work, and always talked about voices like Kevin Conroy's and how that voice, like, you can't mistake who that is. Like, he is known by many people. And think about how many actors we have who have played Batman. Yet I feel like his voice is the voice we all hear as Batman, which is so interesting to me.
Yes. The last thing I'll say on the subject of Kevin Conroy, not that that's all that should be said, but just
right.
In the interest of time. But obviously I've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about the various portrayals of Superman and the role that each of them has played. But, if I really spent the time to unpack the Batman side of it all, I mean, that again, like, I know, I mean, it came up on the show, certainly when we talked about Superman, the animated series, and in particular, the episodes featuring Batman, that World's Finest special and all of that. But, it's not something that I fully unpacked, but I'm sure if and when I do, I think that there will be some pretty profound conclusions about how formative that was, because I was a little kid watching that cartoon. And, even if I wasn't necessarily conscious of the ways in which it was shaping my views of the way I see and hear the character, it's like, I know it was.
Yeah.
So again, I know, like I said, that's not necessarily the purview of this show specifically, but it's definitely part of my journey as a fan and certainly as a Batman fan.
Yeah.
And I'll also say, with respect to Carlos Pacheco, I mean, it's weird how the timing on this stuff works out. So, again, hopefully people are listening to this on Tuesday, the 16th. Next week, we are off for Thanksgiving. We're going to take, when I started mapping out this year, I was like, I have a few holiday breaks, and I ended up not taking all of them, but we are going to take next week off. But when we come back in 2 weeks, I have an episode on The Black Ring by Paul Cornell and Pete Woods, but the episode also covers Camelot Falls by Kurt Busiek and Carlos Pacheco. And I recorded this a while back, certainly before his passing, but even before the news of his diagnosis came out. So obviously it was never intended to be this tribute, but to whatever extent it can serve as that, great. So just so people know, we have that coming out, and it was recorded, of course, well before all of this, but it's been in the can for a little while, and it was just, so again, he was on my mind, right? And I had just reread the work, and we talked about it, and then to hear the news of the illness and then the passing was just really so unfortunate.
Yeah. I was thinking of him. So I was listening to your Black Adam episode with Justin, and talking so much about the JSA and then his work on the JLA JSA crossover. I think it was Virtue and Vice was called. He was a very distinct artist, and you knew exactly who it was when you looked at his work, and it was just profound and wonderful. And he had an amazing run too with Avengers and X-Men too. So he was very special to many people. And 2022 has been hard for the comic industry. It's been very, very rough, starting all the way back with George Perez and others. So it's been rough.
Yeah. And Kevin O'Neill,
Kevin O'Neill from League of, and so again, it's appropriate. I mean, we're talking about the death of a superhero, but we want to talk about the death of our real life heroes too, which is important.
Yes. So we're here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman. Our primary homework assignment was the 30th anniversary special, which reunited the original Triangle era teams who crafted the death of Superman. They each tell a story in this pretty massive one shot, which you're holding up there on screen. If you'll indulge me 1 second, though, there's a story. I don't want to build this up too much. It's nothing crazy, but this would sound silly, I think, in almost any other context. But if there's one place where I think people would be receptive to this, I think it's here, and hopefully it won't sound as silly. So it's not related to the death, but at the end of September, my family and I went to Disney World.
Okay.
Now, are you a Disney guy or no?
I enjoy going to Disney. We're taking the band and orchestra and choir to Disney in March, actually. So we're going to be marching down Main Street and all that kind of fun stuff. So I enjoy it. I'm not, but there are like Disney people, like the Disney Vacation Clubbers and all that. So,
okay. So I'm not at all a Disney guy, but my wife and her family are. I did not enjoy it when I was 5. I did not enjoy it when I was 12. And I really did not enjoy it when I was 35.
That sounds like the worst Dr. Seuss book.
I know.
I did not like it when I was 5. I did not like it when I was 12.
It's funny because we also recently did Sesame Place for the second time. And I get more into that because I
like that place.
I've never had a huge attachment to the classic Disney characters. Like I watched the stuff when I was a kid, but it wasn't. Look, we all know where my interests lie. That, Power Rangers and the DC characters and stuff like that, and Sesame Street when I was really little. So I get more out of that. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point or bury the lead here. So we went to Disney at the end of September. This was a trip long in the works, long delayed because of COVID. I think if it had been up to my wife, we would have gone, very shortly after our son was born. But we ended up, we postponed it, and then we made a big to do of it. So not only was it the three of us, but my mom came, her mom came, her sister and her husband came, a couple of friends of ours came. It was a whole thing. And our son enjoyed it, and that was the most important thing. And there were aspects of it that I liked. But yeah, overall, I can't say that I became a Disney convert. But there was one moment. We were in Epcot. Have you done the Soarin' ride?
Oh, that's one of my favorite things on the planet, I will tell you. It's second to the Six Flags Superman roller coaster.
Gotcha. Which I've not done that, but we did this Soarin' ride. If anyone's not familiar, they strap you in and essentially the ride, mimics flight, and you've got these gigantic screens in front of you, and
it's incredible.
It's really something, and they blow wind, and again, you're moving to mimic the movement of flight. And I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. But the thing that I enjoyed about it was I said to myself, this is the way it would feel to be Superman, to actually fly. Because again, as much as I know there are video games and all that, but it's different because your body is moving in the way more or less that I imagine it would be if you were. And the whole time I just kept thinking how amazing it was. And again, I know he's only a fictional character, but it just gave me more respect and appreciation for just this ideal of Superman. And the thing that I kept coming back to was how amazing it would be to experience the world like that. Yeah. It's so different. It's not the same as flying in a plane, right? And so the grandeur, but the responsibility and just the way that he's taking everything in, it's so different than the way everyone else does. It really made an impression on me.
Two things. My girls and I, when we went on that ride, they saw me start to do it and they immediately did it. But I put my hands out in front of me, like Christopher Reeve, and I put one back, and you feel that like with the wind hitting you, and like we were all pretending we were Superman flying. There's also, and you're close to New York City now, so I mean, there is a ride in just near Times Square called Rise that I think it's like maybe 30 or so bucks a person, but it's soaring, but they take you through New York City and the sights of New York. So it's like, I loved it because it was like you're flying through the Big Apple like you're Superman. So everybody else loved it because they were seeing the sights. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm like Superman flying through Metropolis right now. And it was awesome.
I think I might have to look into that. I mean, I'm not a big ride guy. That's in part why I don't like Disney, on top of all of the walking and the heat. And anyway, but no, that's really cool to hear. But yeah, and we were done. I mean, everyone was very nice about it, but I was like, I felt like I was Superman. It's like, I understand it now. I understand it so much more now. And I think they were probably like, all right.
Oh gosh. Every time somebody, those icebreaker questions that, you're either in the car or you're at a meeting and somebody will say like, so if you could have one superpower, what would it be? I mean, it's not even a question. I'm like, flight, like I want to fly. You kind of want to hope you be invulnerable too. So when you fly into the side of a building, you don't get crushed. But at the same time, like my brain goes, I want to fly. That's all I want to do. I dream about it. I still dream about it. It's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. In addition to Death of Superman, of course, we always bring it back to Smallville. I went back to that scene from season 5 of Smallville where Clark reunites with Jonathan in the afterlife. Yeah. And Jonathan has this whole speech about, you've got to keep your mother safe. You got to keep the whole world safe. And I just had that in my head as I was, quote unquote, flying through everything. Yeah. Anyway, not related to death, but it just, and as silly as it might sound, it just really gave me an even deeper appreciation for the perspective that Superman would have if he existed.
Yeah. I mean, it just helped you define the character more.
Yeah, it did, for sure.
I love that.
So I've been saving it. I've not, because this was the end of September, but every time I've done an episode, I'm like, save it for the Death of Superman one. That's a good spot for it. Okay. So 30 years, I think in terms of our larger conversation, we will talk about, or at least touch on, other tellings of the death, either entirely separate stories. There were a number of pre-crisis iterations of A Death of Superman, as well as after the death of Superman, various adaptations, whether direct adaptations or more loosely based spiritual versions of it. So we'll touch on all of that, but primarily you and I read the recently released Death of Superman 30th anniversary special. Yeah. Now we actually have a couple of patron questions from Brian here. I'll start with this one here. How many copies, and this is for both of us, how many copies did you end up buying? Which cover stood out to you the most? What did you like the most? So how many copies of this $11 book did you buy?
Let's see. Was it $11? Oh yeah, it was $11.
$10.99. They get you.
Yeah. When I throw it into the pile of my other books, you don't notice it quite as much. So that's nice. I bought three different covers. So I bought this one, which is just a newsstand wraparound. I bought the vamp of the poster behind me, where they have all the heroes and the Superman family kind of around a redo of this light shining up from the Superman coffin. And then the black poly bag also. So kind of cool story too. Did you go to Oh Yeah Harrison recently?
No, so I actually got mine through the mail. As much as Oh Yeah is my local store, but I wanted to sort of spread the wealth a little bit on this one, and so I actually ordered the regular cover and the black bag version from Acme Comics in North Carolina.
Nice. Awesome.
As of this recording, it hasn't arrived yet. Which here's just as a tie-in, right? I hopefully people know I do another podcast, my longtime podcast, My Comic Shop History. And I'm in the midst of this trilogy event with Lord Retail from Acme Comics, and the finale drops Wednesday. Nice. And a good chunk of our conversation is about sort of the miscommunication in terms of when these books were going to arrive. And we talk about sort of his customers' reaction to it and everything. So it's, again, if there's any episode of My Comic Shop History, especially recently, that you might be interested in, there's definitely a fair amount of Superman talk in it. Anyway, I've got them. So those are the two that I have coming from Acme at some point, hopefully soon. But another retailer, good old Sean Hendricks from Fat Moose Comics.
Oh, nice.
Out of the blue. I didn't ask him for this. Out of the blue, he just sent me the regular cover. He also sent me the reprint of Superman 75.
Yeah, I saw that came out too. That's awesome. And
it was clutch. So shout out for Jermaine, but shout out to Sean nice. for because yes, I could and would have just gone to Oh Yeah and picked it up, but it was really, really clutch. It came in the mail just when I needed it, because the time, timing was short here between the release and this recording and the release of the episode. So everything had to line up.
The reason I asked was, it's not so much did you go pick up your books from Oh Yeah, but it said Jerry Ordway was there on Saturday, and Mark still has copies signed. He still has some copies available for signing.
Nice. I had other commitments and I was not able to make it over there, which I was disappointed by, but I saw the photos and it looked like the Ordway signing was a lot of fun. I was there, a few years ago for the Action 1000 signing, and I did get everything signed and I got to meet him and everything. So that was terrific. I wish I could have gone for that this time, but I'm glad that Mark had that for the Oh Yeah Harrison, New York crew. That's very, very cool. So the anniversary issue you were saying earlier, we got everybody back. So that was the cool thing. We got Jurgens Breeding, Ordway Grummet, Stern and Simonson, Botnova. I mean, everybody was back. But there's something I want to go ahead and talk how you want to about setting the stage. But it's something very interesting that we brought up at our store that I was curious if you feel this way too. So, was it about how Jurgens used the decreasing panel per page trick again?
No, it was about how and why it looks a little bit different.
Oh, okay. No, let's just jump into that.
Well, if memory serves, Jurgens and Breeding did everything on the book. I think Breeding did all of the colors and inking and everything. Brad Anderson was added to this, for the Life of Superman. And me and Joe were trying to figure out why it looks like Jurgens, but it just looks a little bit different. And we were wondering if that was why. Some of it just has a different tone. It looks old, but it looks more modern. And we wondered if that was because of the inker.
Oh, interesting. Very. I
was.
Don't know.
Do you know what I mean? It looks a little. It looks like the same people made it, but it looks a little thicker. The shading is a little bit different. I loved it. I mean, I'm obviously going to talk about everything from the new character added in, but it did feel like we were reading 90s comics again, based on all of those rock stars that came back and did some work.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. First and foremost, I guess even to back this up, I remember this was a few months ago when DC started teasing an announcement.
Yeah.
And they just posted the bloody red S on the black background, and it's come back tomorrow, news coming soon, something like that.
Yeah. All of us thought that Superman was dying again.
I will look. I'll admit, when they announced what it actually was, that it was going to be a special for the 30th anniversary, reuniting the original teams, each doing a new story. I did feel like they had built it up a little bit too much. Not that it's not cool, and the end product I think is awesome, and we'll talk about it. But yeah, they're definitely at the same time, and it's funny. It's like, what did I want? Because there was that part of me that had the same thought as you. It's like, oh, they're going to kill him again, and then the next thought was, oh, I hope they don't do that. So, what would I have been happy about?
Right. Yeah. Well, you just defined every DC fan, basically. Like, what would I be happy with?
But I guess that's all to say. I certainly knew this was coming. I knew we would talk about it on the show. I put my order in for it. I wasn't, and I know the creators and Jurgens in particular, they've been doing a lot of press and stuff. I can't say I've been like chomping at the bit for this or following every little piece. I just was like, okay, like we'll take it in when it comes in. So I guess I didn't go into this with a ton of anything really. Right before I started reading though, I thought to myself when I, and again, I guess I had known this, but it didn't fully register when I realized how long the issue was. Yeah. And I said to myself, I was like, oh my God, like is each team doing 20 pages, like effectively an issue? It's like we're getting a bonus month of the Triangle era. Yeah. And it ended up not quite being that. So Jurgens does the lead, Jurgens does the lead story, which is about 40 pages. And then each of the other teams, so you have Stern and Geis doing a Guardian story. You have Ordway and Grummett doing a Ma and Pa story. And you have Simonson and Bogdanov doing a John Henry Iron story. Each of those is 10 pages. Which, again, overall, I really enjoy this. I don't want to be a party pooper here. Yeah. If I had been in charge of this, I think it would have been cool to give each team essentially an issue's worth. I understand if you're going to give one the lion's share, I understand why it would be Jurgens, but I can't help but wish that, again, each team had been able to truly do like another issue. But it was still cool to get what we got.
I think it was interesting too, because if you look at each of the 4 stories, clearly there's more meat in the Jurgens story. Like they had to deal with more as to what was going on. We got more fighting. We got more character. We got a new character. The others were kind of retrospective, looking at a different angle. So it made sense to me why they were shorter, but I'm with you. Like I would have liked, I mean, we always want to see more. We always want to see more art, more pinups, the pinups were, we'll talk about that separately, but they were so cool to look through the in-between art between each of the stories. I love what they did with old artists and new. It's great.
For sure. I mean, hopefully people have read the issue. If not, we will be spoiling it, but hopefully you've read it or you're planning to, whatever the case may be. But in that lead Jurgens story, that is set in the present. And we have this worker who was part of the Doomsday cleanup crew who is now transforming into this Doomsday-like creature who John Kent nicknames Doombreaker. This is set in the recent past. So this is before John Kent is aged up. And sort of the thematic and emotional through line of this is John Kent learning that his father had died. Because apparently Lois and Clark never gotten around to telling him that piece of their history. Yeah. So that's sort of the meat of it.
He still thinks Santa is real. Nobody spoiled that for him. but clearly some kid ruined that his dad died once. And he's like, wait, what?
It's, speaking of Santa, it's funny because like our son is 3 and every now and then especially now as we're heading into Christmas and he's got some Christmas books and I'll say like, is Santa real or pretend? He goes, pretend. So
I was like, okay, there you go.
We'll see as he gets older. But anyway. Yeah. So that's the lead story. Then the Ordway Grummett story, like you said, the other stories are set in the past during the Death of Superman storyline. Right. So we know from reading Death of Superman that poor Ma and Pa, they're on the farm. They have to watch this on the television. And so you get to spend more time with them and they have this whole conversation and they go through the scrapbook and sort of a bonus scrapbook that Ma's been keeping. We'll talk more about all of this. And then the Stern Geis portion deals with Guardian. Again, you sort of see Guardian between the panels, between the pages, because he was kind of popping in and out of the main story. Right. And so you sort of follow him a little bit more. And then similarly with the John Henry Iron story, there's that iconic moment, right, where he pops out of the, the rubble is like, gotta stop Doomsday. Well, you get to see the before and after as he was like trying to make his way to the battle. And it very much calls to mind the sort of the folklore of John Henry and the man versus the machine, right? As he's performing almost superhuman feats of strength as he's Again, at one point, seemingly holding up a building. Not quite, but
I do believe he was. One thing that I did really enjoy about this was in each of the stories, well, especially the 3 retrospectives, they almost sketch by sketch, like there are panels taken from the original books. And it's like, that's like your landmark panel. And then they fill in all of the gaps around it. So you see exactly what it looked like in 1993. And you're like, oh, there it is. And every single one had that. We had the same, like the logs coming down around Superman and Guardian. What is that? Is that Cadmus? Is that officially Cadmus, that area? Yeah.
Of the habitat.
The habitat, right. So it was just cool to see, like, oh, there's like a panel directly lifted, but then we learn more about how we got to that point. Because in the original books, again, they're snapshots. Like you just see what's happening from Superman's point of view, and now we're seeing all the different points. The Ma and Pa story was incredible to me.
Same. That was, not surprisingly, that was the one that resonated with me the most. And that was the one. So like I said, I don't mean to tear this thing apart, but I know we have to have an honest discussion about it. There was a lot I liked. The Ma and Pa story I thought was great. I thought that was an instance where that really added, because the glimpses of Ma and Pa in the main story were so fleeting. Every now and then you would check in on them. They'd be watching on the television. And so to really settle in with them and get more of a sense of what was going on the farm, I thought was beautiful. And it really added. The Guardian and John Henry stories, they were well told and they were enjoyable, but at the same time, I don't know that I ever really wondered, how did Guardian get there? And the reason why I even bring this up is that, the bittersweet aspect of all of this is it was wonderful to see these teams back, but it's, unless there are future plans that have not been announced yet, it's like a one-off thing. And so if each of these teams, especially for the retrospectives, only has 10 pages, the imagination wanders, and it's like, maybe there could have been another angle that just would have, I don't know, shed light on something that we were really more curious about. I don't know. Again, they were enjoyable, but I did sort of have that feeling. It's like, if this is all we get, I don't know. I guess I just wanted more.
You said that in like the nicest way. You said, I don't know if I ever wondered. And I was like, Anthony's basically saying, like, I really don't care about the Guardian. Can somebody just tell me something else? Like, care about this guy. Why are we talking about him?
More or less. That was sort of my feeling. Although the other thing, and this is why it is bittersweet, because I know Jurgens is going to have one of the segments in Action Comics, this new Superman family version of Action Comics with 3 different stories. So that's cool. But these guys, each of these teams, these guys still got it.
Yeah.
And so I say to myself, man, if only there were some scenario where this could be Action Comics, like this sort of format where these teams are reviving that Triangle era in some way. And this is probably the oldest that I've sounded on this show. It's like, I wish they could just bring back that era that I grew up with.
Get off my lawn.
But it was just kind of beautiful to see that world come back. And again, it's not like, just in terms of any issues that I had might've been with just the choice on who or what to focus on, but in terms of the execution, it's not like I read any of these stories and it's like, you kind of see they've lost a step or something like that. It's like, no, they were right back in it. I wish there were some possibility of I don't know, a miniseries, an ongoing, a graphic, like something where these teams were back doing their thing and really working within that world that they had created in the 90s.
So like while we're playing the what would we have done if we were in charge game, I really loved the John Kent side of the first story. I wonder if it would have been really neat that instead of going to the past, we let different people tell John their take on that day. Like where John is us, like John is the reader, or John is a new kid who has never heard about Superman dying. and how that could have been really a different, like Ma and Pa Kent are telling their grandson, like what it was like to feel that and why that was scary, because they didn't know. They thought he couldn't be killed. And maybe not go the guardian route. Maybe Lois is talking to him separately, and though, I mean, I think that could have been a really interesting take, and that could have been a neat lead into John is now older in Action Comics, and he's now dealing with the possibility that his dad might die someday. And he just finished hearing from all those perspectives from what it was like when his dad actually did die. So I don't know. I mean, there's always going to be a chance for us as fans to go, oh, that might have been an opportunity lost, but I'm a band director, not a comic creator, so I don't get to do that.
I love that. Let's take a quick commercial break and then we'll continue discussing. We'll be right back. Yeah. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I was fortunate enough to have my work shown at these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and currently under new ownership, Moose sells a wide selection of new and old comics from every publisher, action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP, that's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions, to save 10% on your order, and it helps support the show. Thank you. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, which happens to be my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Aw Yeah. And we're back. I love that pitch that you made. And yeah, that's the thing. I mean, look, we're here, we're speculating, we're talking about what we would have done. I think it's all good. And yeah, at the end of the day, I can certainly respect and appreciate that for each of these creators. And look, for Jurgens in particular, this was his opportunity. I don't know what, if any, parameters he was given, but to whatever extent he was like, this is what I want to do. It's like, awesome. It's your story. You do your thing.
Yeah.
I would have loved something like what you described. I think I don't know. I guess I keep bumping up against this idea that Lois and Clark didn't tell him, but Lois does acknowledge this was not something that they like to relive or talk about. So I do get it, but that they never told him, and B, that, like, I don't know, it slipped their mind that the anniversary was coming up and that there's going to be all this news coverage and everything. It just felt a little bit like, really, guys? But that's the premise here. And so the fact that John has to wrestle with this idea of, what his father has been through and his mortality, just as this new Doombreaker creature emerges. I think it certainly works. If I'm rewriting this, I would have told, again, it would have been 20 pages, right? Not 40. Each team would have had 20 pages. And I would have told the whole story from Mitch Anderson's perspective.
Oh yeah. I love that.
I love the idea that Mitch came back. Of course, the punk kid from the original storyline, whose house and family are saved by Superman. And, he starts off the story thinking Superman's lame and he loves Guy Gardner. And then he has this whole turnaround and you see him dealing with his guilt afterwards that, Superman stayed behind and lost time to save his family and everything. And he would come back later. He was that Outburst character.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
For the Superman of America. Was it Outburst or am I thinking of the Spider-Man Slingers character?
Hold on.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, we'll look it up.
I think it was Outburst. Anyway.
Someone will put it in the comments.
But we haven't seen him, as far as I know, in a very, very long time. And it was cool to see him. He's at John's school talking about the experience. And it's like, that to me, I'm like, oh, that's the story here.
Yeah.
That's the story. What the hell has this guy been up to? And what's his perspective on all this?
All right. Now we talked about this when we first had our episode. I would have loved a whole, even if it was 10 pages, where the Justice League is telling John where the hell they were that day. And Batman gets a chance to say, yeah, I kind of missed that. And all of us go, yeah, where were you, buddy? You sent Blue Beetle.
Yeah. No, I know that's the thing. Because I feel like when you look back at that story, for us as fans in particular, what are the questions that we've always had, sort of thing. But if that's not what Jurgen saw as his objective with this, that's perfectly fine. I guess you and I have talked about this, and very recently when we talked about Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey and then the Doomsday Wars, this idea of, or as I put it in particular, the diminishing returns when it comes to Doomsday. The first time was great. Yeah, you can't really top that. And every time he comes back, it's just sort of like, all right, here we go again.
Right. Yeah.
So here we have a little bit of a new spin on it. We have this cleanup worker who decided to keep a memento from the battle of Metropolis, and he's got this bone. This one of from Doomsday, and it's apparently been secreting vapors or something and mutating him and turns him into this 4-armed Doomsday-like creature who attacks. And so we get another battle, and it's like everyone's out there on the street in front of the Daily Planet, just like the first time. Everyone's wondering what's going to happen. Of course, Superman prevails. Lois brings the bone that this guy had been keeping, and at first Superman's like, oh, this is making him stronger, but then he has the idea to use his heat vision, and the heat vision filtered through the bone is able to reverse the effects, and so the guy is saved. But I mean, what was your take on it? Did you enjoy this?
Okay. For all the listeners too, like as you're listening to Anthony explain this, how we don't say, what kind of batshit crazy Bronze Age story are we reading right now? Like if you think about everybody do the rewind 30 seconds on your podcast and listen to Anthony describe, like, the guy kept a piece of the bone and now he's got 4 arms. And then Superman thought, I should use my heat vision. It's kind of bananas, dude. Like I did not love it. I didn't. Like the minute Doomsday showed up, I'm going to be honest, I kind of lost interest. I know that sounds terrible, but I was in with the Mitch Anderson and all of the John dealing with the emotion side of things. And I would have rather them just go through some flashbacks and explain to John why it was hard and how we don't know if it could happen again. But yeah, like, I don't know. I don't know whether it was like trying to appease the fans by bringing Doomsday back again, I'll listen. I think Doombreaker is one of the most terrible names ever. And I'm like, what? Why? What does that mean? And why did John come up with that? Where do you we should call him Doombreaker. I'm like, no, shut up. Stop it. I know. I did not like it.
Perry White liked it. He's like, oh, you take after your parents. It's like, get out of here. I guess despite whatever misgivings I had about the setup here, that Lois and Clark had never told John and right. They forgot that this was the anniversary. It's like, I can get past that. I think the emotional hook of this poor kid is learning about the worst day in his parents' lives. Like there's meat on the bone there, and that's fine. But yeah, I'm with you. I think when we get to the portion of the story where Doombreaker shows up, it's just, there really doesn't feel like there's really any tension or any stakes there, because we've been down this road. And you bring up an interesting point. It's like, I don't know. Is this something from DC where it's like, hey, you got to have you got to have a doomsday battle here? Is it Jurgens being like, hey, I want to draw a new version. I have a new design of a 4-armed version. I did like that because it called to mind the 6-armed Spider-Man, which I am a fan of. But, I don't know. Is it, so I would be curious, was that purely a creative choice, or was it a feeling either on the creative side or the editorial side, but just this feeling of like, hey, we have to have some sort of doomsday fight in here, otherwise people aren't going to like it. But I say to myself, and what I would say in response, if that were the thought, is, who is this book ultimately for? I don't think this is meant for new readers. I think this is for people who love the original story. And I think I would have been happy with 40 pages of just dealing with the emotion and the character moments here. I didn't need the battle.
Well, if you want a battle, go read the freaking book 30 years ago. It's pretty great. So like, that's the thing where I guess I didn't understand the whole need for that, but maybe that could have been just, like you said, it could have been Dan, it could have been DC saying like, hey, this would be really cool. I don't know. I did lose interest when they were fighting, because I'm like, we know how this is going to go. He's not dying. Like,
I agree with you. I think maybe flashbacks or something would have been fine. I think also too, for me in particular, I recently read and covered the Dan Jurgens Action Comics run with Rebirth. And that of course it begins with a rematch with Doomsday. So I just feel like we've been down this road so many times, generally, but especially very recently. So you did the Tomasi run with me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and Scott did that Action Comics run. So as I was saying it, I was like, wait, was that with you?
Oh no. Yeah. It's which of my buddies did I do this with? Yeah.
Let me, no. We'll continue, of course, making our way through the special, but actually I have a couple of interesting questions here. So we have one more question from Brian.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a big picture question, but I think it's interesting. And, while we're talking about DC editorial and decisions and things like that. So Brian says, looking at the state of the current publishing DC Universe line of books and characters, do you think they could have produced a Death of Superman level story arc now? I bring this up because it wasn't Superman who drove the story forward. The death wasn't the main event. It was the funeral, the aftermath. Without such a strong and fleshed out supporting cast, the follow-up stories would have fallen flat. I don't believe the DC Universe is as cohesive as it once was. Boy, that's a diplomatic way of putting it. Yeah. Superman's supporting cast barely exists, along with subplots. Anyway, it crossed my mind, and I'm curious what you guys have to say on the topic. Do you think something like this could work?
I think, Brian, I think what we're seeing currently in DC, as recent as these last weeks, answers the question. Dark Crisis is not hitting. Like, I think they keep trying to re-energize or put the magic back in the bottle and shake it up and try it another way. But like Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths is okay, but they're wanting to do something special that was already done. And I just don't think so. We've already killed Batman. We've already killed Wonder Woman. We've killed Superman. Like, I don't know if we need to do that again. And I think with comic, I feel like comic fans have a longer memory than movie fans. So you could reboot a Superman movie or a Batman movie or whatever the case may be and go, oh, I see how they're doing that. And they try this again. But I don't think there's a need to reboot a book. Nobody's rebooted War and Peace. Like, nobody goes back to Kill a Mockingbird. Well, actually, no, they did try to do a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. So it didn't go well. But you know what I'm getting at? Like you have that already there. Just go read that and just be okay with it and enjoy finding new aspects that you missed. Like when you watch The Godfather, like there's gonna be something you're like, oh, I never really noticed that. Or the older you get, or the more wise and learned you get, you notice different things. So I guess my long answer is I don't think there's a need, Brian. I think they've done it and they did it well. And they keep trying and it's not working well in other ways. So I hope they don't try it another way soon.
So I agree with all of that. I mean, I read everything that Brian sent, but my reading of his question, and I could be wrong, but either way, I think it's an interesting sort of twist on this. I took the question more to be, assuming Death of Superman never happened, could you execute something like this now? Now, this becomes a little bit of an interesting thought exercise because we've had so many deaths of other characters.
Yeah.
Have those also not happened? So, because I do think that changes the equation a little bit, but even putting that out for a second, I don't think it, at least creatively, because I think what Brian is getting at here is something that I do very much agree with. That, I mean, anyway, he says the Death of Superman wasn't the main event. I mean, I don't know. I think it was certainly, to an extent, but I agree wholeheartedly that it was everything that came after that really gave this legs and made it work. And I think cemented this as what it is and what it's remembered for. I think if it's just the battle and then a quick return, I don't know that we're talking about it to this extent. I think it was the fact that they really mined that emotional fallout and then gave us this like awesome blockbuster sequel with Rain and introduced all these characters. There was so much there. But I do, to Brian's point, I mean, I think the reason why so much of this worked, and especially Funeral, was that you had the supporting cast. And I've said this a million times, especially when we do our Triangle era events, but the supporting cast was the secret weapon.
Yeah.
And the subplots were the secret sauce of this era.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't think you've had that. We've had that in the books to that extent, really, since this time. And so I don't know. I mean, I think some version of it, I'm sure, could exist, but I don't know that it would work, because that's the thing. When you remove the main character, it's like, okay, now what do you do? But they had this infrastructure in place, right? There were all of these characters, and there were so many different perspectives to explore. So that's, I think, why ultimately this worked.
Yeah. There's sides of that. Now that I'm hearing that question a different way, I think the answer is yes and no. So here's why it's a yes. It is a very different, it could be a very, very different type of story with John Kent in the picture.
True.
If John Kent is fighting alongside of him, or he's younger. I mean, let's say it happens now. John Kent, as a young adult, being able to be there for his dad dying for his son, possibly. We still have Martha and Jonathan around. Like you're saying, the supporting cast is not very present, but something we have much more present in the current DC universe that was not as much. I do feel that the Trinity and the Justice League themselves are much more present in the Superman universe than they were in the late 80s and 90s. So it could have been a very different, like everything we were like upset about, they might have been able to pull off. Now, the supporting cast argument, here's why that worked. I want you to think about how many actual issues in the Superman world we had from 1987 to 1993 versus like just from Rebirth alone. Like it's not even close. It's not even close. We had 4 books a month, sometimes 5. Like that, it's just, we had the ability to tell a soap opera with the supporting characters. And like you're saying, you take away Superman, now people care because it's like, whoa, you're watching all my children on Able and whatever, you take out the main character, everybody else is still there and they're figuring out how to live without their patriarch has died and that kind of stuff. It's still interesting. But now, yeah, I don't know. So yes and no is my answer.
No, that's a good answer. And you bring up a number of really good points. I do agree. The whole John aspect gives you a new angle to play, and I think there's really something there. And I agree. I mean, look, if even for those of us who love the story, I don't know that anyone really thrilled at seeing Doomsday go up against, Maxima and Booster Gold.
Right.
No offense, but that's a fan.
Well, look at how close John and Damian got. And if you have Batman in the picture there too, fighting a Doomsday as a human greatest detective doesn't help you much. Like, he's running interference. Like, we've seen it in the animated versions. Like, it's tough. But I just wonder, like, that, Brian, that could be really cool. Like, it could be a very interesting take. And I think that's what we tried to see in the Death of Superman animated film. I think that's what they tried to remedy. They made it seem more now versus then.
Yes, and I do want to circle back to the adaptations. I have one other, not so much a question, it's not an audience question, but another sort of thought exercise here. I had mentioned this to you off mic. So actually yesterday, or if when you're listening to this 2 days ago, the Real Life Daily Planet, there's a Real Life Daily Planet, dailyplanetdc.com, released their Fall 22 magazine, and it is devoted to the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman. And I was very fortunate. I had the opportunity to write an article on how the death of Superman shaped the landscape of the Triangle era comics that followed up to and including the wedding. So again, for people who hopefully enjoyed our Death Till Wedding series of episodes, I think this works as a very nice little companion or coda to that. So I hope you will give that a read and read the whole magazine. I think it came together great. Shout out to Zach Benz for putting it all together, our own very own Perry White. But there's an article in there by someone named Connor McKenna. I don't know, but it was very interesting. It's called "Why Do We Celebrate the Death of Superman?" And essentially Connor makes this point of, of why, I guess, in terms of the fandom and from the publishing side, the industry, I suppose, like, why do we focus so much on the death rather than, he brings up the point of other stories generally, but even just in this context, why is it the death and not, for example, the Superman's return in Reign of the Superman, right? Because when we do talk about this, I mean, we really do zero in usually on the death of Superman. Now, we spoke, and I did a whole monologue about why the death means so much to me. But I guess just this big picture question, I would be curious for any take you have. I mean, we always do talk about the religious comparisons between Superman and Jesus. So I guess maybe another way to put this is not what the article is about, but sort of what's going through my mind. It would be like if we, Christians were just all about Good Friday, and then Easter was just sort of like, okay, like a little bit of an afterthought. So I don't know. I'm curious what your take on that is.
Well, okay. So before and off mic, we were talking about this too. So I think when you get so vested in a universe, whether it be Superman, Star Wars, Harry Potter, no matter, like, you come to, I mean, or for that matter, reading a book or watching a series, you become so almost enamored with the characters. Like, they become the closest thing you could have to a fake friend, or a fake family member. They're like, we joked about watching like How I Met Your Mother for all those seasons together. And when the show ended, we're like, we don't get to see our friends anymore. Like, you become so connected to those characters. I think why we either honor or celebrate, for lack of a better word, or glorify the death side is that the emotional weight that carries when a character dies. Like when Dumbledore, sorry, spoilers, when Dumbledore dies in Harry Potter, that's big. That is the father of the entire character universe dying, and it's hard. It carries weight. And I think when you don't have that, like, what are the other characters going to fight for? Like, without the death, we don't get Steel. We don't have other characters stepping up. We don't have Supergirl stepping up. We don't have, like, it builds something inside the other characters. in our own families, when somebody dies, you take over the weight of that person. You move forward, you step in, you step up. And I think there's an emotional side of it that we want to read about, we want to learn about, so that we know how to deal with it in our own lives. I think that's why we talk about it. I think it's why you and I, it's very special to us. There is something very hard when our favorite character dies. And then thank God he came back, because like if he just didn't exist after 1993, what the heck we wouldn't be talking about all this. But I think that side of it, even when when you're playing as a kid, when you're pretending you're a character, when you're playing superheroes, somebody ultimately has to get killed in the story. And then I'll avenge your death. And they chase after the bad guys, that kind of stuff. So I think it's important. I think we inherently want to celebrate. Again, celebrate's a weird word, maybe honor or glorify somebody's passing because we cared about them so much. And we hope they come back like Superman does, but they don't always do.
Well said, Mike. I think that's a perfect answer to it. And I think this also kind of ties into the conversation I was having with Lord Retail on the other episode that's coming out, because he brought up the point of, he's curious, we're doing a 30th anniversary here. And so, I know he has customers who weren't born, when the story came out. And he's like, what does this mean to them per se?
Yeah.
And look, as with anything, you can always come to this in back issues and things like that. But I do think for those of us who do quote unquote celebrate, or like you said, honor, I think is a good way to put it. This story, I do think that the shock of this at that moment in time does in large part account for why it does mean so much and why we do gravitate to that. Again, I've told my story a million times about how this was my start, but I think and I'll also say this, it's funny, not that I ever thought, I'm the only one who started with Death of Superman, but it's been really interesting in recent years, and especially leading up to this anniversary, because Jurgens in particular has been doing a ton of interviews, and he always talks about how so many people come up to him and they're like, this got me into comics, or this got me into Superman. And I guess, like I said, it's not that I thought I was so unique, but I guess I wouldn't think this would be such a natural starting point. Like I had a very specific set of circumstances where everything sort of like clicked into place for me. But it's really cool. Like and I'm happy about it. It's not like, oh man, I thought I was the only one. Like I love the fact that there are so many people who kind of got their start with this. And as I wrote in my article for Daily Planet, in my mind, I forever think of myself as having just gotten into comics. Like I'm still relatively new at this. It's been 30 years.
Yeah.
Not so new anymore. But anyway, but I do think that whether this was someone's first comic, like it was for me, or just kind of a seminal moment in their journey, like for you and for so many others, I think there was so much at that moment in time. And you talk about the media coverage, and that was one thing that I really did like about the Jurgens story, was how they were able to use the anniversary of Superman's death within the context of the story to sort of make some commentary about what was going on and is going on now in the real world with respect to the death of Superman. They talk about how it was all over the news everywhere you went. It's like, well, just like it was in the real world. So I think that's part of it too, especially for those of us who were there and really keep coming back to the story. I think there was just so much wrapped up in that experience.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because my mom has a picture of me. I think I'm maybe 5, like jumping off like midair off the dining room steps. I'm wearing like the Superman shirt and underoos kind of outfit, but like I'm 5. Like I wasn't reading comics. Like Superman was like the granddaddy of all the superheroes, like on the DC side of things. And he didn't need to read comics to know who Superman was. Like he was just a symbol of awesomeness. Like if you see a Superman symbol, that's so cool. So I think it was a big deal, because he was really the first superhero I feel that they decided we're going to kill him. Like and again, I'm sure I don't know what year like they killed Captain Marvel, like the Marvel side of Captain Marvel, not Shazam. But I just wonder, like, that's a big deal. It was a character that's been around at that point for 60 almost years, like, and is a worldwide symbol, no matter whether you read or not. I think that was a big reason why it's still something that people are talking about. It was like, oh, this is big.
For sure. And I mentioned that I have that reprint of Superman 75. They include a transcript of a recent virtual roundtable with Mike Carlin and the four writers of the Death of Superman. And I think the forthcoming Death of Superman 30th anniversary hardcover has the full transcript. This was an excerpt, but a couple of things. Carlin made the point, and we've addressed this on the show, and we've been accurate, I'm happy to say, but he reiterated how it wasn't the TV division, it wasn't Lois and Clark that forced the comics to wait. DC Comics made that decision. They wanted to tie into the show for the publicity. So we've addressed that. Ordway, I think pretty sure it's Ordway in that roundtable, also made the point that there's this misconception. And I'm trying to remember when we were talking about this last year. Yeah, maybe we need some correction. Because Ordway made the point that I guess the lore that's developed around this is that sales were sagging, and this was one of the reasons why they did it. And he was very clear. He's like, it's not that sales were bad. He did say the books were performing vastly better on the newsstand than at comic shops. And there was just this sense that, especially among, I guess, the older fans, I suppose, that they were taking the character for granted. And so this was an opportunity, hand in hand with, hey, we have to kill some time now that we're not doing the wedding. And, Jurgens had this idea for a while, like he had wanted Superman to actually have a physical opponent who could challenge him in that way. And so like all of these forces kind of came together to create this story. But to whatever extent, I don't even remember, but if we did sort of fall into that trap of, hell yeah, sales were down, that's, again, Ordway was very specific about that was not the case, at least generally, maybe if they're a little soft on the comic shop side. Yeah.
No, I don't think we need correction, because when we talked, there was a discussion at the roundtable meeting, and they were having their super team meeting. They were having the, what do we do next? What do we do now? And then we're not going to have the wedding. And that was the joke. Like, why don't we just kill? Like every time somebody would say, let's just kill him. And then they finally went, oh, maybe we should. And then they're like, wait, really? Like we used to always joke about it. So no, I don't think it was ever because sales were down. I think it was, what can we do that's different that we've never done before, or that many have not done before? And here we are 30 years later talking about it. It is, did we do something for the 25th anniversary? Like, I don't remember there being a 25th anniversary thing.
Oh.
It's odd to me, like, why is 30 an important number? Like, usually people celebrate 25 and 50. And that's why I was kind of like, what the hell is so important about 30?
What's funny? I remember the 20th because I remember they put out a new trade paperback at least. I know there's also, there have been various printings of the omnibus, and I know maybe that's coincided with anniversaries, but I remember, you know what? I remember this very specifically because I made a Facebook post about it when I remember taking a photo of the 20th anniversary trade paperback at my old comic shop, the late Alternate Realities. And I remember making a post about it because this coincided with the dawn of the New 52. And I remember in my post being like, I'll still have this story, but I can't follow DC in this New 52. Of course, look, my perspective has changed now. You never know. You never know where you'll end up. But I remember that. So yeah, I don't know specifically. Anyone listening, please let me know. Was there any fanfare for the 25th? We're only talking 5 years ago. I don't know. Nothing immediately comes to my mind.
It just threw me off because I was like, usually people celebrate like silver and gold, and especially since we, use those words with comic books.
I also do want to go back when, the Brian question about how many copies. And I know I said, again, I got this, Sean very graciously gifted me that one copy that I talked about, and I have two coming from Acme.
Yeah.
It's funny in part because of the $11 price tag, but also my collecting has changed a lot where I don't even really consider myself much of a collector. Most of the stuff that's on my shelf or in the box that I have in my closet, it's just the stuff that means something to me.
Right.
Not that this doesn't mean something to me, but, especially the question about like different covers. I'm pretty happy to look at the art online
Yeah.
and be like, oh, that's beautiful. Maybe I'll make it my wallpaper or something like that. I no longer have this feeling of, oh, I have to own that
Right.
physical copy. And I'm very happy about that.
Well, and I got just the typical cover A. That's going to be I'm reading this copy. Like, I was fine feeling like I read it. I'm not throwing it down the stairs, but I'm also okay looking at it. I'm like this with all variants and this kind of stuff now too. Like, I have to really go, ooh, that's a great depiction. I've never seen a depiction of something like that for me to buy it. Because again, they're not cheap. Like, it's another $6 or $5 for a book. I mean, I've got bins of all the Superman stuff that I love. I've got all those books, but I have really 2 or 3 short boxes of like special books that are either a variant or like a number 1 of something that is either worth a decent amount of money or it's a special book for me. Like, it won't be special to many, but like The Last Starfighter movie adaptation, I have that like in comic book form. There's silly little things that I find valuable. Not everybody finds valuable. And I think you resonate with that too.
Totally. So listen, again, I want to circle back to those other stories in the special, but before that, let's talk about adaptations a little bit, because I think this is interesting. First, a preliminary question. The answer for me is no, or more specifically, not yet. Have you read either or both of the Roger Stern and Louise Simonson novelizations?
I have read the Death and Return of Superman novel, the hardcover.
Okay.
I have it in the back room. Yeah.
Because I guess Louise Simonson also did it was more for younger readers.
Yes.
But she did one as well. I own the Roger Stern one. It's been on my shelf. Another gift from Sean Hendricks. This guy, Fat Moose Comics. I know you heard the commercial already, but really, this guy really takes care of me, and I do appreciate it. So I've not yet read it, which I know people are probably like, how have you not read this? There's a little part of me that's just, I kind of like knowing that there's still something new.
Oh, it's excellent. It is excellent. It is. I've never been huge on reading like movie novelizations. I think there's some things that are not added, but it's just, I don't know. It's not the same.
Well, they're usually based on the original screenplay. So
correct.
It can be an interesting experiment to compare, right? It's not so much that they're adding, but it's more like the movie, changed or took away, and you get to see what the original intent was.
Yeah. And, but this Death and Return novelization, it is so fun to read because we already have the artwork in our heads. And I think it's seeing the descriptions. It's all the stuff in between the bubbles. All the stuff that we had to create for ourselves in between the word bubbles that is really well exposed in the actual prose. I think it's great. The Simonson one, I feel like is called like Doomsday and Beyond or something. Mm-hmm. It's like a smaller paperback, but the Roger Stern ones, it's a good paperweight, baby. Like it's a home defense system. You could hit somebody with it and take a knock them out. Maybe it's good. It's read it. Get on it. Come on.
We're going to get there on the podcast. We will get there. I just have not read it yet. Surprisingly, I know. Similarly, I have not read, or not read. I have not yet listened to the BBC audio dramatization. Have you listened to that?
Is that the Superman Lives?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's me. I heard that. Yeah, I have the CD version. Yeah.
As do I, and this was a gift from a listener, Josh. So thank you very much. People really, really hook me up with stuff, and as do you as well. I mean, I'm very honored by all of this. Yeah. So those are the novelizations and the BBC radio show. Those are a couple of things that I've not yet mined. We'll cover it on the show, but when we talk about adaptations, direct or loose or spiritual, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
I think we have a few different categories here. We have something like the animated movies, Superman Doomsday, which, was more or less a direct adaptation, though excised most of, I think, the most interesting aspects of the storyline, but just gave you a very streamlined depiction of a battle with Doomsday and a return and a battle between two Supermen. And it was very, very stripped down to accommodate a 75-minute runtime. More recently, we have the 2-part movie adaptation, The Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman. And that gave you significantly more, and I think was probably, maybe with the exception of the novelization, the most faithful direct adaptation we've had of these stories.
I really enjoy watching those. I think I've rewatched those now 3 times, and it's enjoyable to watch. I think that's the closest we're going to get.
That's probably true. I mean, on the live actions, well, actually still in the realm of animation, I know Justice League Unlimited did give us Doomsday, or a version of Doomsday, but they did not do a full-on death story. They did give us that Hereafter 2-parter in the Justice League series where Superman seemingly dies. So you do get to see an aspect of the world mourning him, but it's still not a direct adaptation of this. And then, of course, in live action, we have Superman's death at the hands of Doomsday, or a version of Doomsday, in Batman v Superman, and then his eventual resurrection. So again, I would not say, that's a direct adaptation. Obviously, they used elements and the broadest strokes of that, but that was certainly not like a death and reign adaptation per se, And then there's whatever the hell Smallville did at the end of season 8 with the whole Clark Kent
I
is
knew
dead
you were going to bring it
business.
up. I knew you were going to say it. I was like, don't say Smallville season 8.
You have to include it in the conversation.
I have now, after watching, I'm watching Titans on HBO Max, and how they're making that show and how we can really push the limits. I feel like HBO Max would be the best way to do like a 10 episode, 1 hour Death and Return of Superman series, just one season, done. And I would watch the living heck out of that, because I think they would actually do it right. And they would have access to, I think, really great budgets and CGI and actors too. So I would love to see that.
Well, I think you get at what is kind of a fundamental frustration, or maybe not even that far, but just this curiosity, right? Where I think you hit the nail on the head that any true adaptation of this needs to be long form. What's fascinating to me, and it just defies logic, is since the death of Superman in the comics, we had a 4-season Lois and Clark series, a 10-season Smallville series. We're heading into season 3, which, let's face it, is going to be the end for Superman and Lois, but still 3 seasons.
You heard that news, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the CW as it's existed is not long for this world. So, I know people are probably quick to say, it might end up elsewhere. I think given all the other goings on with Warner Brothers Discovery and their new heads of DC Films, I think this is going to be it. I just hope that I hope they see the writing on the wall. I hope they craft a great ending and we get a complete, 3-season arc. That would be beautiful. I would love that.
With a new actor.
And then, yes, with the new son. And then on the animated side, you had from Superman, the animated series, through Justice League Unlimited, you had years worth of an ongoing narrative here. And it's crazy to me that we've not had, because that is, I think, the best way to do it, because you need the time. And I think when you look at something like that first animated movie attempt, Superman Doomsday, when you try to shove this into 75 minutes, the only way to do it is to cut out what makes all of this interesting. So you don't have any of the heroes falling in battle before Superman. You don't have that fully realized supporting cast to mourn him. You don't have the 4 replacements showing up, each sort of representing a different aspect of who Superman is, but no one quite on the mark. You're left with this one doppelganger who he has the showdown with. So it's just, you lose so much. And I think, look, if I had to make that movie in 75 minutes, I'd probably do something similar. It's like, I think given the confines of what they had, their choices made sense, but this is just not a story built for that, and so doing it over 2 movies, definitely, I do think as far as direct adaptations go, that is the best that we've had so far. I really love those latter 2 animated movies a lot. But it just shows you need the real estate. You need the screen time to tell the story properly. But it's just crazy to me that we've had all of these series.
Well, and I think now that it seems, and again, I don't want to say this before I see it, but I feel like the new direction that maybe DC and Warner Brothers might get to have now, with some people that actually have a clue. I think that the DC films, they're getting smarter about not doing as much too soon. But the HBO Max thing is the way to go, guys. Like, you could tell a great story in 10 hours, and you can decide either to be done or do another series, like do another season with those characters. But yeah, like I'm with you totally. I just don't understand why it doesn't seem that hard. Like, just read the trades, see how long it takes to read the trades, and that's how long the movies need to be. Like, it's not hard to figure out.
Yeah, and especially now that we're at a point, look, if Lois and Clark had attempted this, I don't know what on earth their doomsday would have been, you know? So, but by the time we got to Smallville, certainly the technology was at a point where we had Doomsday on the show, you know?
And he looked, in that mid-season episode, it was like maybe episode 8.
Episode 10, Bride.
Yeah, the Bride one.
Yeah.
Doomsday looked incredible.
That was the high point of that season, man. The first half of season 8
they
was
should have
great.
just stopped. Like, and said, just kidding, and then did season 9. But I loved the way, like, clearly the technology was doable, and I'm like, oh man, that would have been cool.
And even more so now that at the point where we are with Superman and Lois, and
Yes.
I know they teased Doomsday and then pivoted, but you know, we even prior to Superman and Lois saw Doomsday brought to life on Krypton, which I still haven't watched, but it's coming and coverage is coming soon. So stay tuned.
I got to watch that show. I haven't watched any of it yet. That's on my list.
I'm excited to do it. But I guess my point is I feel like so many of the pieces are in place, and telling it over a number of episodes just lets you have the story breathe. And what's, you know, it's funny because it's not like this was the intention when the creators made this, but the comic book inspiration gives you a way to still keep your lead actor in the mix. And you can do it any number of ways. I mean, certainly he could play the cyborg character. You can do the afterlife bits. You know,
Make him be the Eradicator. He's wearing friggin' sunglasses.
Exactly. There's so many things that you could do.
Yeah, it's just odd to me that, and especially now. I mean, again, we're young. We may get there. We might be 50 or 60, but I feel like we'll get there. Somebody's going to go like, okay, now we can do it.
I mean, I love your idea of HBO Max. I know that after Crisis, there were a lot of fans, myself included, who were clamoring for a Brandon Routh Kingdom Come HBO Max series. I feel like, you know, there's a guy who can still do this, and there's an appetite among the fans to see him in the costume. I think maybe there's a way to...
Oh, I would see Tom Welling in a heartbeat, if that's where you're going. Because
no, I was thinking Brandon Routh. Tom Welling, you know...
I think Tom Welling would pull off the aged Kingdom Come.
Oh yeah, sure. But you know, if it involves wearing a costume, I wouldn't hold my breath. But anyway, I think that whether it's Brandon Routh or Welling or someone new, I do think that would be the place. Now, as much of a defender as I have been of the Snyder movies, you know this, and the audience knows this. Yeah. I do, you know, since we've had a Doomsday and a Death of Superman on the big screen fairly recently, I feel like as much as we see ideas get recycled a lot, I don't know that we would see this again anytime soon.
No, I think it'd have to be in at least 10 or 15 years. Yeah. Or it would just be a different, like how, again, like HBO Max, for example, is you could do a different, it's just not the same universe. You know, like the Titans is not in the same universe as other stuff going on right now. Like that's the nice thing, that they're trying to keep them separate. I don't know, man. I mean, we may someday, we may be lucky that when Henry Cavill does get eventually like too old to do this anymore, and he is officially done for reals, that maybe they'll have a newer actor take over, and then they'll reboot some stuff.
Yeah. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in Crisis, you know, when Lex Luthor was going around killing all the Supermen of the multiverse, we did get that imagery of the Bitsy Tulloch and Tyler Hoechlin versions of the character, of her, you know, cradling him in her arms. It was brief, but they had that iconic image. So I appreciated that. I'm not going to turn this into a whole Snyder episode, but what was your take on the death as depicted in Batman v Superman and the role that it served?
Man, it's so interesting that my wife, who has been with me through the whole journey as early as college and getting these books and talking about this and hearing me talk about this ad nauseum, and she went with us and Val to go see the Batman Superman Dawn of Justice movie. And it was incredible that she was the first one to say, that's just not the way it should have been. And me and Belle went, thank you. Like, for her to say that, like, that was that kind of, her take was, there should have either been one movie that was the Batman and Superman stuff, and then basically Doomsday shows up at the end. Wonder Woman shows up and they're both going, who this chick? And the movie ends there. And then the next third movie is Trinity. And the three of them have to figure out who Doomsday is. Fights Doomsday, he dies. And it makes more sense. And that's why the Justice League is then forming the fourth movie. But they did a typical DC move and crammed 10 pounds of movie into a 2-pound bag and said, good luck. And we didn't like it. So
no, I understand. It's a lot of movie. It's a lot of movie. It's not a light watch. It's very dense, but I am a fan of it. I will say though, the depiction of the death, the first time I watched, I remember coming out of the theater and feeling, I guess like you and your wife, like that was too much, too fast.
Right.
And the other thing, and I know there've been a lot of criticisms. I know one of the criticisms specifically about the death was, again, certainly going off of the comic book inspiration, he dies in the comics at a point where he is known and beloved and he's had this lengthy tenure and he dies for the city, right? And they mourn him. Whereas here, this is a world, look, going back to the Christ analogy, this is he dies for a world that has persecuted him.
Yeah.
And I think I shared that criticism initially. My perspective has changed because I recognize, well, the death here was meant to serve a different purpose. Like in the context of this story where the world has doubted him at every turn and questioned his motivations, he still makes the choice to die for them. And in so doing is able to finally inspire and unite them. And, so it comes at a vastly different point in his journey and serves a different purpose. Yeah. So in terms of, direct adaptation, no, it doesn't line up. But in that context, like that was a choice to use it in that way. And I've come around on it, but I understand people who kind of bristle against that. And like I said, I did initially too. I understand.
And I'm never not, I still rewatch, BVS. I'm like, no, I don't like what it did. I'm not going to watch it ever again. It's a part of canon. It's there. Like it's not going anywhere, but I feel the death of Superman in 93 in the comics, they had a lot of chips in the bank, man. Like when John Byrne took over and rebooted everything, that post-crisis, they put a lot of chips in the bank for people to give a crap. And like, I just feel like if you're going to kill Superman, you got to put a lot of chips into the audience. So do Man of Steel 2, do Batman versus Superman. And then I think both the Earth in the movies and the Earth in real life would actually care more because there wasn't a movie since 2006. Like nobody, and there wasn't a movie before then since 1980 something, So yeah, I guess that to me was like, it wasn't about the characters in the movie. To me, it was the people going to see the movie. Like, why should they care Superman died? That's what always bothers me the most. And that's what Renee was getting at. She's like, no, that was too rushed. Like, what if Lana was watching this and she didn't know anything about Superman? Would she care that he died? So it's just an interesting conversation, but yeah.
No, it's true. And I know this speaks to larger audience frustrations with the Superman as depicted in those movies. And like I've talked about this a lot. I know my perspective has shifted and I just think the one thing I'll say is when this comes up about him not being or not acting heroically, right? And because he's and the fact that just in terms of the character's disposition, that he's not always sunny and smiling and cracking jokes. It's like, well,
Right.
again, in terms of this world that he's been placed in and the challenges that he's faced with, I think everything sort of flows naturally. And in fact, he's quite heroic because he's still doing it. Like he dies for this world that has doubted him and kind of turned him away in a lot of respects. So,
well, and I'm so excited. I know that's weird, but I'm so excited that he gets more chances.
yeah,
That Henry Cavill's Superman gets more chances. There's so much speculation now that I can't even look at it. I'm like, no, just tell me when it's confirmed stuff. Don't speculate anymore. But I mean, I think it's going to be really cool for now him to be the loved Superman, like that he might be back post Justice League, whether it's the Joss one or, whatever. But now it's people hopefully will really love him. And he is trying to save, like whether it's Brainiac or whoever. I think it's gonna be really exciting.
we'll see. I know you mentioned the Black Adam episode. Yeah, people, I do have an episode on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. We just did an episode on the Black Adam movie and that post-credit scene and the future of Superman on screen. So, we talked about a lot. Like I said, I came around a lot on the way the death was used in Batman v Superman. And as far as the resurrection, I know I said this when we covered Zack Snyder's Justice League. I'll reiterate here. The scene of Clark walking through the ship and hearing the voices of his fathers is one of my all-time Superman moments from anything. It always brings a tear to my eye. I love it. Followed shortly by one of my all-time favorite Superman action moments when he shows up and kicks the crap out of Steppenwolf. So that movie gave me two of my favorite Superman moments. I will say, and you know this because when we talked about death and funeral and rain and everything, one of the things that I loved so much about that was Adventures 500, where we get to see Clark and Jonathan in the afterlife. And you see that, it's not just that Eradicator puts Superman's body in the rejuvenation matrix, right? There's this whole other component. He's actually fighting to come back. And it's the sort of both parts of who he is that he needs in order to do this. And I wished that, it was a 4-hour movie. I wish that there could have been 2 minutes for a scene with Clark and Jonathan in the afterlife, something to just kind of show what was going on the other side, as opposed to them just putting him in that mother box bath and he's back.
Well, I mean, if Zack Snyder did like 20 minutes less of slow motion, you might have gotten that. It would have been really good.
Fair enough. I mean, I don't mind the slow motion, but yeah, I mean, I would have sacrificed some of it for a scene like that. I like something like that really would have gone. I guess you can argue hearing the voices in the ship is kind of a substitute for that, but I think it would have been cool to see.
I love the Snyder Cut. I mean, I think everybody should watch it. I think it's worth watching it. I think it's long, but it's a slow burn. It's good. I think there's a lot to it that adds to the mythos. I think it's important that if you're a Superman fan, you should watch it. And the Black Adam episode is great. Like, I love listening to it. Holy crap, though. Like, if you don't like hearing the F word, don't like.
Yeah, Justin's got a bit of a potty mouth, no doubt.
Justin's mouth. It's hilarious. I can't stop laughing sometimes. Like, wow, he used that as a verb, a noun, and an adjective all in the same sentence. That was impressive.
Well, that's why whenever he's on the main show, we got to throw up that explicit tag. But it was a fun episode, and
it's a great episode. It's a lot of fun.
No, thank you. And I know I mentioned the Smallville season 8. It will forever haunt me. But for anyone who's not familiar, this was the Doomsday season, and I mean spoilers. But at the end of the season, Clark manages to separate Doomsday from his human host, Davis Bloom. Right. The idea here is that Doomsday was able to adopt human camouflage, which. Right. Here's the thing, it's a
cool idea. I will tell you that's a cool idea.
To this day, I always say that even though it was, necessity is the mother of invention. And even though it was born out of the fact that, hey, we don't have the budget to bring Doomsday to life 22 times. And also we're the CW and we need a hunky guy for people to look at. Even still, I thought it was a great idea because we know from the comics, Doomsday always evolves and adapts. So the idea that he would develop this human camouflage is great. Like it was a great great idea. It's funny in the Jurgen story and the special that we were talking about, we have a guy sort of morphing into Doomsday. But to my knowledge, and I've covered virtually everything in recent years, unless I'm totally spacing on something or I fell through the cracks. But have any comics utilized this idea? And I'm putting you on the spot here, but maybe the fact that nothing comes to mind is the answer.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, they kind of did something like this already with the Super Doom arc.
Okay, that's from
Action Comics. It's like it's they're one of the most recent iterations of Doomsday. I think it was in the New 52, I want to say.
Okay, because I did skip that crossover stuff. Well, I might circle back to it down the line.
That's okay. But no, it was basically that Clark, there's a Doomsday virus. So like he is becoming Doomsday from the inside out. So it's a little of that. Like they kind of took a little of that for this.
Gotcha. Okay. So maybe somewhat inspired, but still not to the extent that we got on the show. I still think it's a great idea. I think when we talk about all of the adaptations, direct or otherwise, I think that's a really cool addition to the mythology. So, at the end of the season, Clark is able to use black kryptonite to separate Davis, the human side, from Doomsday, thinking that he saved the good part of this monster. But Davis then proceeds to kill one of Clark's friends. I'll leave it at that for anyone who wants to watch. And the end of that season is Clark walking away from Chloe, right? He's had the realization that he made the wrong choice. Like he chose Davis's humanity and the human part was really the monster. And so now he's decided to turn his back essentially on his human side, right? And he's just going to be the Blur and he's going to save people. But as he says, as he walks away, Clark Kent is dead.
Yeah.
Everything else aside, I guess, because there's a lot more to talk about with that season finale. But that aspect of it, this version of giving us like a death, so to speak, did that work for you in any respect?
The first half of that season, I thought, oh, we're going somewhere really cool. Everything you said, I jive with. I think it's a cool take. I think they were trying hard. I just can't. And how they ended it again. If you haven't watched it yet, I'm not going to spoil it. But how they ended it pissed me off more than it gave me closure. I was like, oh, son of a, like it just made me upset. But it's like I tell my students too. Like there's lots of different types of music. I don't gotta like all of it, but I appreciate it. So let's say this too. We got to remember that, like when Anthony's doing a podcast and we have all these guests come on, it does sound like we kind of shit on stuff, but let's remember the fact that we're all still really excited that we have like tons of content to either talk about, celebrate, or shit on. Because like if we were doing a podcast between 1987 and 2006, it'd be about an hour long, where there wouldn't be as much to talk about. We'd have Lois and Clark and a few things here, but like we've got a lot of stuff. It's like with Star Wars fans get all hot and bothered on like the new series that came out. And I'm like, guys, you should be freaking happy there's content to see and talk about.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my little soapbox.
No, I agree. And look, I always say it, and I think people know that it comes from a place of love, and passion, and I mean it's and there's plenty good that we always have to say, but the other thing too is, I think this kind of jumping off of what you were saying, if we just loved everything, would not be very interesting, or I don't know how interesting the conversations would be to have or to listen to.
Yeah. I mean, I would hope the listeners are also, we're kind of the voice that they probably have in their head sometimes. They're like, yeah, I didn't like how they did that either. I'm glad somebody else agrees with that. Or, oh, I kind of like that. And now they at least go, oh, I wonder why I like that. And we ask ourselves that question. We're not trying to convince anybody of liking something or not liking something, but we look at both sides and go, this could have been cool. Oh, I like this. And even you and I don't always see eye to eye on certain things, but we definitely always say, hey, I appreciate what they were trying to do there. I just didn't enjoy it. Like, you might watch something 3 times. I might watch it once and I'll be like, that's fine. But I think, like you said, it makes for interesting listening on an episode. You find yourself agreeing or disagreeing.
Totally. The last thing I'll say on Smallville is just, I have to imagine someone in the writer's room was very pleased with themselves when they came up with this idea, right? Because of course they know the comic book inspiration, the death of Superman, and at whatever point they knew that they weren't doing that, but they wanted to have something death of something. And someone's like, well, death of Clark, but we don't kill him, but we just like his Clark Kent identity, which that too, of course, was a comic book story that we talked about. But anyway, not a high point for the show, but did introduce an interesting idea with respect to Doomsday. As far as the adaptations go, is there anything else that we didn't hit on that you want to say? I feel like we covered most. We
covered a lot of them. I mean, I think the thing you also wanted to touch on was, where have we also seen Superman die before? Where that's the segue to the next section. I think you wanted to touch on too, was like, have we seen this before, but haven't really talked about it as much, and it's not glorified as much as the 30-year anniversary, but it still existed.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of pre-crisis stories, imaginary or otherwise, where Superman dies, or at least seemingly dies. We've covered some of them on the show before. Superman 149, the death of Superman, which was an imaginary story. We definitely touched on that before. That's maybe probably the most famous of the ones sort of on this list. And there was a Screen Rant article that I had sent you that had broken down some of these. And audience, if there are any pre-crisis death of Superman stories that we don't mention that you know of, please let me know. I would love to check them out. But there were a number of others. I did read The School for Superman Assassins from Superman 188.
I wondered if you did 188. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting, right? Because you do have a number of these. I mean, I'll just rattle them off real quick. But the death of Superman from 149 that I mentioned, the last days of Superman from Superman 156, he doesn't die there, but he is sort of confronted with his mortality with this virus that then comes back in Action 363, which that issue I've not read. The Superman Assassin School issue, which I just mentioned. Action 387, where I think I did not get to that one, but I think there's Lex sends him to the future, something with the future. I know that is an issue there. And there's a World Finest issue with Dr. Light, and a Justice League issue called Carnival of Souls from 145. Those are the main ones that were mentioned on that list. Like I said, a couple I had already read, and then I read The School for Superman Assassins. What would you like to talk about with respect to this?
I actually I didn't think I would like it, but though it's not do you want to talk about pre-crisis or the other ones too?
I would say, wait, what were the post-crisis ones?
Well, I mean, don't forget, between the Kingdom, there's that side of things. There's the All-Star Superman side of things. There's the last days of Superman, basically the end of the New 52.
Yes.
Which that one I'll talk about in a little bit if you want to, but I actually enjoyed that more than I thought I would, mostly because it was killing the New 52. But yeah, pre-crisis, I think whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow is my favorite pre-crisis. I guess is that pre-crisis?
Yeah,
or is that,
that's the last. That's the last.
The very last. Very last. Yeah. Those two. It's Superman. What is it? 423 and 383. No, it's 583. And something like that. 423. But where he goes into the gold kryptonite room and theoretically he dies, but then the question at the end is he really Jordan Elliott, who's married to Lois, which is the greatest play on Jor-El ever. But when was the last time you read those two back to back?
Oh, fairly recently. I think maybe a year ago, or maybe a little bit. Well, maybe was it 2 years ago now? About a year and a half. We'll split the difference.
I feel like you did an episode, but it wasn't on this show.
So I did an episode years ago before I ever did Digging for Kryptonite. I did a run of episodes on my Patreon page, and one of them was on this. But then, yeah, wait, what was when I read this and we talked about it, when I did my episode, how the Arrowverse failed the Clark Kent of Smallville, all about how I did not like the way Crisis handled Tom Welling's Clark Kent.
Right.
In that instance, and that clearly took an inspiration from whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. That's where we talked about it. So it's funny because when you said, but other stories, and I was like, wait, what other stories? Literally, I'm looking at my Excel list and I've got my other category and they were there. I was like, what is he talking about? I was like, oh yeah, those. Because I was really dialed in on those other pre-crisis stories. But yeah, whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, we'll get to it more in the future. But it's the best thing that I can say about that story is, of course I appreciate it more now that I've delved more into pre-crisis Superman. But the fact that even when that was the only pre-crisis Superman story I read, it was still one of my favorite stories. I don't know what higher praise I could give it.
Yeah. I mean, essentially he's kind of saying goodbye to everybody, and it's a great two-parter and a really cool way to finish off that whole chapter of comic book history of the DC universe. It's great.
I'll say, with The Death of Superman 149, the imaginary story where, Lex Luthor seemingly turns over a new leaf and, Superman's on board and they're palling around and they're working together. And of course it's all a ruse, and Lex kills Superman with kryptonite and Superman does not return. No. Nope. I look at that and I think it's a great Luthor story. I don't, as far as a Superman story goes, he's just seemed pretty easily bested and permanently defeated. So it's definitely worth reading. I mean, if you're looking for, sort of some quintessential pre-crisis stories, definitely read it, but it's hard for me to be like, yeah, I love that story. that era. My mom actually has a number of those titles. Like she showed me a lot of those issues she has at her house still. And they're quite good condition from the mid 50s to early 60s, but there's a lot of great imaginary stories where all the loves of Superman, how they died and why they died. Like you have Lois and Lana and Laura Lamaris. There's an incredible issue about that too. But there's some really cool late silver, early bronze issues about just death of characters in general. It's cool. Gotcha. Well, it's very interesting too, especially now, we're not talking anymore right now about adaptations of the 1992 story, other instances of a Superman dying, right? Because you mentioned the New 52 farewell, and even something like Infinite Crisis, where the Earth 2 Superman dies, right? We have other instances of things like that, where I think whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow and All-Star Superman are particularly interesting. Is that they're the final chapter in that version of the character's story. So, that puts a whole other spin and a weight to it. Again, both of those are things that we will have a lot more coverage on in the future, but and not to choose between the two of them, but I don't know. I guess out of those two or anything else, if it would apply here, I mean, what do you gravitate to most as far as a final Superman story?
From the whole list, it's interesting because if we're talking about the Death of Superman 92, did Jurgens originally bring them back? So the Lois and Clark miniseries after Convergence, that was the way of having another crisis without using the word crisis. And we knew we're bringing back everything before the New 52. And in parentheses, because the New 52 didn't really work out very well. But they needed to figure out, how do we get rid of the New 52 Superman, since we're bringing back the one from 1987 to 2011, and they had to kill him off. And it was kind of interesting because he didn't really do anything. It was a Superman that was around for 5 years, but they had to kill him to allow that 1987 Superman with the beard and the black suit and young John Kent when Lois to show up and become part of continuity again. So I gravitate towards that because it was a death that actually had meaning. We're killing off that Superman to bring back the Superman that we've known for almost 25 years at that point. So it wasn't the death just for the sake of killing. It was a death that had purpose in my mind.
No, I get what you're saying. No, your point is well taken there. Yeah, because I know it's not like it's quickly undone or anything like that. It's
right.
That character is gone, but it's not someone who just, like you said, 5 or no more than. Oh no, at that point, it was 5. Yeah,
5 was
years.
2011 and 2016. Yeah.
No, I hear you. I guess, I mean, for me, I do always go to whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. I need to spend more time with All-Star. I know it is so beloved. I don't dislike it. My enjoyment of it has not risen to the level that I know it does for a lot of people, but I will be spending more time with it. There's a lot of stuff that I really love in it, but in my heart, I really do always go back to whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. It's just, I mean,
now,
so much
have you done an episode run on All-Star yet?
Not yet. We'll get there.
Yeah. And see, like, if you don't have somebody, I would happily unpack that with you, because I think the only way you're going to appreciate knowing you is if you have to do an episode on it and have to do the deconstruct deep dive. You're going to poop your pants. There's a lot of crazy good stuff in there.
Well, the thing that, again, I don't want to derail us here. We'll circle back to
it's okay. Yeah. We're at 2 hours, I think, on this one issue.
But yeah. But the last thing I'll say about All-Star, I think, to put it as like bluntly as possible, I don't think I really got it the first time around, because, I was so used to reading a certain version of Superman. And this was before I had read really any pre-crisis Superman. Now I can look at it and say, oh, I see what Morrison is pulling from. And this is all of Superman's history distilled down into this story. So I know the next time I really spend time with it, I know I'll get a lot more out of it. And I've got some ideas, we can sort of, there can be a look at the stories that that inspired Morrison. In any event, that's definitely fodder for future discussion. So I guess the one other pre-crisis story that the one that I specifically read just before we sat down to record was Superman 188, The School for Superman Assassins. So you have read that one?
Yeah, it's pretty rough, man.
Oh, it's hilarious. It's so funny. Yeah. So there's this on another planet. There's a school for Superman assassins. They practice on Superman robots.
Yeah.
And this star student has this idea to essentially transform Kryptonite into radio waves.
Yeah.
And makes a couple of attempts when he gets to Earth. The first one hits an actor who's just playing Superman. So that first attempt is a fumble. But then this student is a real go-getter. So he goes to like the broadcasting tower and broadcasts these rays across the city and gets Superman. And they're, I don't know how explicit they really are, but seemingly he is dead for all intents and purposes. And when they bring him to the other planet, they're going through, it's like, there's no vital signs, like this and that. Like it seems like for all intents and purposes, he's dead. Do you want to do the honors to explain how he's revived? Cause this was probably my favorite part of this.
Well, and was it the android?
Yes.
So there's an android who was supposed to act like Superman that they would basically train on how to kill Superman on this android.
Right.
And the android revive him somehow back to life?
He like reverses he's able to reverse the effect.
The polarity.
And pull the Kryptonite radio waves out of Superman's body, and it destroys the robot in the process.
Yes.
And Superman is revived. But so, I think technically he was dead for that period of time. He was lifeless and he was green from the Kryptonite poisoning
for like 10 pages.
And look, we've done episodes on this. I've really come to learn to love Silver Age Superman in particular.
Oh yeah.
There's something just so out there about it, and they're wild and fun to read. So,
well, now hold on. We got to put a little parentheses asterisk caveat though. Like, super not okay though in some cases.
Oh yeah. I mean,
like the stories are fun and funny, but like some of the crap that like comes out of the dialogue is like, oh, that's not okay anymore. You can't say that anymore. Especially how Superman talks to women is not great in the Silver Age. And I know you talked about some of that in the earlier episodes, but I love the Silver Age because they're bonkers, one and done kind of episodes too. They never had to deal with an 8-part series. It was,
Right.
here's a really weird story that somebody came up with, and here you go. And then you're like, oh, cool. And then whether it was real or imaginary, who knows? But it was fun.
Well, they're all imaginary stories in the end. I think, I'm, of course, it's a natural to talk about the Death of Superman adaptations. I'm glad we talked about this because I do think it's worth mentioning that, yes, there were these forerunners, these pre-crisis forerunners to the Death of Superman. And no, none of them, I guess maybe with the exception of Superman 149, you'll find that collected in all of the, anniversary, decade, collections and things like that. But, none of these ever really cemented and had the staying power that the Death of Superman from 92 had. But, interesting to know that there was, this had been attempted in some form before. But of course it would be 30 years ago where we would get the story that we're still talking about. Circling back to the special, I know we spent a lot of time on the Jurgen story. I don't really have a ton to say about the John Henry or Guardian segments. Was there anything there that you wanted to talk about?
No, I mostly really enjoyed the Ma and Pa Kent one. I guess in the Guardian one, I guess I've always really enjoyed Double X, the Cadmus character. So I liked seeing him show up again. But again, we were seeing more pullbacks from the original issues too. So like some of that interaction was real. And I love how they go a little more in depth into Dan Turpin and Westfield.
Yeah.
Like how when Westfield's trying to steal the body and Dan Turpin like socks him in the stomach. I like how they go a little more in depth on that. But I don't say I didn't enjoy it, but again, I was kind of happy they were as short as they were. I'll be kind in saying that. And again, the Steel one was a little, it didn't do much. Like it didn't say much. It was just like kind of nice, I don't know, reminiscing more is a good word for it, but it didn't offer a lot of depth.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was cool to see these creators on those characters again. I just feel like even if you had such limited real estate, and I wish they had more real estate, it's like, if you only have 10 pages, I don't know. I don't know
what more they could have done actually, because it was so short. But at the same time, the Above and Beyond one with Ma and Pa Kent, that was the same length, but there seemed to be a whole lot more there.
That was maybe slam dunk. I thought that was the highlight for me for this whole issue by far, where, like I said, we're back on the farm while they're watching this battle on the screen, and you can imagine what they're going through.
The scrapbook that Martha puts together that we never really see is, it's not just who he fought. It's the selfless acts that Superman was doing, that she kept saving all the humanity of Clark in the newspaper articles that you find about Superman. Nobody else knows that except for them. They're like, this is the boy we raised. And that's what I loved about that, is that you saw the Clark in Superman, even though the rest of the world sees Superman.
Absolutely. And just this idea that, he's helped as this medical courier, transporting organs for transplants and things like that. And, Martha has basically followed the people she's done a good bit of detective work here, right? Where she's looked at obituaries for people who died like on those days, and then subsequent stories of people who received those organs and what they went on to do. And I think the thing that stood out to me the most about this, and as both a child and a parent, like the thing that really resonated with me was, Jonathan and Martha talk about like what Clark doesn't tell them. And it comes up in a couple of instances, right? Where one of them acknowledges, like, because they reminisce, they have the scrapbook, but they also reminisce about some of those Triangle era greatest hits, like when he went out into space and War World and everything. And they talk about how, like, he doesn't tell us the extent of how bad it really is, right? And of course he wouldn't. He doesn't want to worry them. But then similarly, when Martha's talking about, all these donor, recipients and everything, like Clark doesn't make a big deal out of those either. And she doesn't put them in the scrapbook because she knows that, he doesn't see himself as the hero in that story. Right. Like he's just helping, but it's the doctors and it's the donors. Like they're the ones who are really doing something. So I don't know, just that idea of what he doesn't tell them and why, but the fact that they still know And it informs, everything that's going through their minds as they're watching this. And even Pa's like final acknowledgement of like, and we know where this is going, right? It's the moments right before, but it's like he acknowledges like with who Clark is. He's more human and more humane, he says, than anyone. And if it comes down to it and it's a matter of him laying down his life to save this world, he'll do it. It was such a great segment.
And I mean, Jerry Ordway's always been strong. Even when he took over in the Triangle era, issues before the death. Some of his stories were the best because I believe he did Adventures of Superman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, those are a lot of the stories that I think you and I really loved. A lot of the parallel lines that happen in those, in the cast characters. I will also say Tom Grummett, I miss him. Like I miss his art in the Superman cast of characters because, okay, this is going to sound really interesting. Like he draws in a very wholesome silver Bronze Age, almost Midwestern kind of look when he does Ma and Pa and characters in general. They look larger than life. And if you look at I don't know if you have it in front of you.
I can't have it in front of me. Yeah,
it's okay. There's some of the way he draws the sadness on Ma's face. And there's all these close-ups too of them. If you look here, I think you're listening. Yeah. It's just the way he approaches that. It looks very different than anything we see usually. It really, Grummett draws almost in a throwback kind of vibe in a lot of ways, which I miss quite a bit actually. Yeah. So I adored that whole segment.
Right on. So listen, we're just about now at the 2-hour mark. I got to put up the episode very shortly.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say? Anything we didn't get to that you wanted to talk about?
Oh no, man. I always love talking to you. And I think it was cool that we always have a lot to talk about, even on just one 60-page issue or whatever this is.
I had a blast as always. I love it. It's a beautiful thing to me that we can continue to find so much to mine from the death of Superman. And, regardless of, what I would have done differently if it were up to me with this special, I'm very grateful that we have this special, that the creators were all, ready, willing, and able, and came in and, got right back into the groove and, gave us new stories and new material to talk about. So, again, I think if I had to boil down any frustrations I had with this to one thing, it's just I just wanted more. And I hope that, I hope this is well received. And I hope that, because look, in success, anything is possible. So my hope is this is a smash and, maybe this opens the door for more things like this or different formats or whatever the case may be, because we've been talking about it so much, but this whole era was a fantastic time and it's been wonderful to revisit. And it would be great to see it revived in some way. Although, it's funny, like when we talk about TV show and movie revivals, like I've become very wary of those because I feel like more often than not, it's a letdown. So I might be eating these words if this ever came to pass, but maybe I'm just riding the high now of doing the Death to Wedding run and now this.
There you go. Yeah.
It's just, I guess, and then I really will end this. I don't mean to keep us here forever, but I guess it's just that, here's the best way I can put it. The more time I spend with these Triangle era stories, reading and talking about them and, comparing to what we've had before and after, the more I recognize what a singular moment that was with those creators and that cast and everything that they were doing. And so, the more I realize it's like, no, I don't know that we would really ever have that again otherwise. And maybe we don't need to have it again. Maybe it's enough that it existed once, but I just realize more and more how unique that was. And so I guess when there's a potential for maybe recapturing some of that, it's definitely something that's intriguing to me.
Maybe at the end, the only thing that I would love to see more is at the end of this 30th year, somehow, a new action figure line would come out. that we get. I want a Dan Turpin and Maggie Sawyer action figure. That's what I want. I want the cast of characters that we don't always see. That's what I want.
I'm with you. I will co-sign on that. Well, listen,
Yeah,
Bernie, thank you as always for joining me. It's always a pleasure. I always enjoy comparing notes with you. I look forward to the next time that we can do this in 2023 as we're winding down here on digging for Kryptonite for this year. So I look forward to the next time we can do that. And again, like I said, we will be off next week. Listen, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, a safe, healthy, happy holiday. However you celebrate it, I hope that you have a good one. And make sure you come back in 2 weeks. Like I said, we'll be looking at The Black Ring and Camelot Falls. And a couple of episodes after that, we'll be looking at a couple of lost/forgotten Adventures of Superman runs, one by Joe Casey and the other one by Greg Rucka. So those are sort of the three remaining episodes that we have coming out for the rest of this year. So make sure you join us. And as always, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive additional content, including my DC Movie Rewatch podcast at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Thank you to all patrons for enabling me to produce this show. Also, be sure to explore the other shows within the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, which is home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, all hosted by yours truly. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts. Visit flatsquirrelproductions.com for more. Thank you all.